Okay, so here's the end result of our sign replacement. So this would be what you would call a surface replacement. It's very common in film, in era, or what would you call it, era specific films where we need to replace signs and building fronts and things like that. Invisible effects, you might call it, that aren't noticed, but that allow you to kind of change a contemporary street, for example, into an old street, or whatever you need to do where you have surfaces that need to be replaced for some reason. Now we're just using a sign because signs are everywhere. They have text on them and they allow us to do a nice motion track. Now this effect, in its basic sense, is a corner pin effect, and the corner pin is done through the use of our 4 dots put on the sign when it was shot. So the plate has the dots on it, but you won't see them when you put the replacement surface on top. Now, what I also have here, which I'm going to switch off, is motion blur that's been added afterwards. You'll notice when I hit play now that it's a very jagged, sharp type of movement because the shutter speed is up at something like 1/250 or 1/250th of a second, which allows us to get sharp movement, easily tracked features. Okay, so that is something that you will do. You will shoot with a fast shutter speed and then you'll bring it in and put the motion blur on it afterwards to make it look more natural and photographic. Okay, so the first step would have been to track the dots, but we're not just going to track them in a basic way. We're going to track each dot as a perspective corner pin, but we're going to offset our attach points up and off the edge of the sign so that when we pin in our object, it's going to go all the way off the edge and then we're going to mask it back in so it looks nice and natural. And you'll see that when I put back on our replacement sign. I'll just switch off the text for a moment and you'll see that it pins it in up here, down here, and down here off the edges. Now, what we're really looking at there when we look at the replacement surface is a rectangular shape that was pinned in but has been masked with a rounded rectangle mask with a slight adjustment here to take in the fact that the sign has a dent in it. If I switch that off just for a moment so that you see the entire surface and go back out, you'll see that it is just a fairly clunky rectangle that has been tracked in to those points, the attach points that I created. Okay, so the reasons are obvious for the mask. We wanted to kind of sit into the sign and we wanted to kind of blur to the edges so that it looks somewhat natural. And you can see that there. Now, if you look long enough and closely enough, you'll see that there are a few little bits that could be adjusted here. That bleeds slightly out into the black, and I may have accidentally not covered the tape on one of my features, one of my dots. So effectively, that's what you're looking at. You're looking at a masked version of the sign, a clean version of the sign, tracked in with corner pins. So the original would have been captured, I think, roughly here, because we can see most of the front of the sign or at a front-on angle. Then you would go up to composition, save frame as, Photoshop layers, and that gives you something to work with then in Photoshop. So this would have been the first the first step, just bringing it into Photoshop, and then you do a few transformation changes to it. So for example, you kind of zoom out and get your Control T. Sorry, now I'm not in the right version here, if you bear with me. It's going to get rid of all this now. I shouldn't have exported all my layers there, so I'm going to delete those and just keep the background layer there. Right, so Command T on the background layer, and then by holding down Control and dragging, you can deform and get it kind of mapped out to the edges. It's a little bit like a corner pin in a sense. It takes a few goes, but eventually you just need to get it there. You want to get it kind of out and then to come back in until you just start to get it to the edge of the yellow part of the sign. So it's a little bit fiddly, but you know, just takes a few minutes to get. You want to get as much of the sign, the original sign, as possible. There. And around there. Okay. So then you zoom in, and from here on in, you're going to be doing a lot of cloning. So you go up to the clone stamp tool, you hold down Alt, and you just start using that to get away. Now, before you do actually create a duplicate, because what I did here was I cloned out everything, got a nice yellow clean front, and then I masked onto the original layer to get those dents back. So I'll just quickly demonstrate what I mean there. So the clone tool does all the kind of heavy lifting here. You're just kind of trying to do this for as long as it takes to get rid of the lettering. Whoops. And that takes a little bit of time, but once you have it done, then you know you don't need to do any more cloning. So for example, where let's say if I were to clone out that just to get a nice clean yellow, I could then click on my mask and get myself a black paintbrush. Let's bring the size down a little bit. Just find that scratch again, and if I just do a little bit of brushing there, yeah. Oh, I'm still on the clone tool. I need to be on my paintbrush too. See the way you can paint through the mask to show the original dents and cracks and stuff like that. So that's the process. So you're looking to clone out the lettering. Again, I'm in the wrong place. You can tell I don't use Photoshop very often. And then draw masks to get back your dents. Okay, so what you're looking to end up with then is something like this. Okay, so this is with maybe 10-15 minutes of cloning and masking, and you can see there's a lot of stuff going on there. Now, the beauty of it is you can always come back and work in Photoshop, save it out again, and it'll just update the version that you have in After Effects. So if it doesn't look quite right in After Effects, just go back and edit the original, save it, and it will automatically update, as I say, in After Effects. And you end up with something that looks close enough to the sign that you can then pop into a pre-comp, mask it off, and pin that in. So that is the effective, or the effect in its basic sense. So we have our clean version of our sign that we've created in Photoshop. We've brought it in, we've pre-comped it, and we have pinned that in to our tracked background. And from there on in, after that, to add the text, we just need to create a composition that will pin again to our 4 points that we've tracked. And a very easy way to do that is to create a solid. The reason for that being the solid will be created at the exact same size as the composition that you're working in, and that will then pin perfectly into the 4 points. So I usually create a solid, pre-comp the solid, and once you've got your composition created, you can actually delete the original solid. You can put your text in there then, and it will perfectly pin regardless of the size of the composition. You now have the exact dimensions that you need for that to be pinned. So where I created that text in its own pre-comp, I can now go to my tracker and find the original perspective corner pin track that I've created, edit the target, and this one is called solid to text layer for pin. Click OK, apply, and there you have it. perfectly pinned into the center of our new sign. So that's just to demonstrate an easy way that I usually use to make sure that the thing that I'm pinning in is going to be the perfect dimensions, so that each corner of my pre-comp will sit nicely on those 4 points. So that is step one. It's about getting your clean surface in Photoshop, getting your tracking, pinning in your new surface onto the tracked original surface, and getting a pre-comp with some text in there that allows you to do the work.